was 2020. And the startup was going great. I'd 5x revenue in 2 years. I had built a great team together. I was about to 4x revenue in a single year, had it all lined up. I was like, oh my God, like, I'm pretty sure I can retire after this. And, and this was in-store retail. So basically doing computer vision and touch screens in retail so that the moment you touch a product, the touchscreen would wake up and tell you about the product. And then, of course, COVID hits, right? And the notion of like touch screens, anything touch, anything physical retail, it all fell apart and fast, right? So we lost 70% of our customers in 60 days, right? I had to fire 60% of the staff. Everybody took pay cuts. The Series A term sheet got pulled. So I'm out of money going into the pandemic. Every contract, no. We never prepay on contracts. No. You'll prepay on this one. Investors who completely written off their money. They're like, there's no way you can raise any money. And I was like, no, I'm going to raise money and I'm going to get them to get over the hump. I had to get prepayments on invoices before they were paid. Well, the company I worked with said, I had a renewal coming in 3 or 4 months, but it was like a 3-year deal. And they were like, we don't do anything unless it's invoiced. And I was like, I can't invoice it. It doesn't renew for 3 or 4 months. And I worked with them and the company would have gotten out of business if I didn't get it. And I got them to say yes. And it's all those little fights all the time. It's not one thing.
Welcome to Midlife Remix, the podcast that explores midlife transitions and how people have reshaped their careers and lives to focus on what truly matters. I'm StevenMiyao, a coach who helps guide professionals through these often challenging but rewarding pivots. In each episode, we share real stories, practical insights, and compassionate advice to help you find balance, purpose, and fulfillment. Hello, everyone. I'm excited to have Trevor Sumner here as my podcast guest. Trevor has been an entrepreneur with a number of different very successful startups. He's been an executive at larger companies, advisors to many companies, as well as an angel investor. And most importantly, he is a recent dad. Welcome, Trevor. I'd like to talk to you about your background and how you grew up and how that has shaped you as a person and what has given you that resilience to be able to do the things that you've been able to accomplish.
Yeah. Part of it also comes, I think, from my father, who was, one of the last Jews out of Vienna. His father couldn't get a visa, ended up having to stay behind and was killed by the Nazi. And my father had non-carcinoid tumors in his chest, and they literally cut it open with a hacksaw in the 50s, right? It's not even close to what it is now. And he had one lung and he was sick all the time and he powered on. But part of it was just this notion that there's nothing can get in your way. You're a Sumner. And that this was the family thing. Did your parents help you kind of have that kind of identity, that some differentiation?
It was more specifically from my dad. You're a man or you're a boy, and so boys don't cry. And trying to please my parents has been a big reason of, I think, my success. Where once you are an adult and you no longer need to impress them, of course, you still have that little voice in your head who continuously beats you up and saying, you're not good enough, you're not able to do this enough. And so that was more my drive to continue to push.
My father took a slightly different take, but I come home with an A-. He wouldn't say what's wrong with you. He would say just what happened? Why didn't you get an A? It's just you're a Sumner. This is what you're capable of. And it was much more positive, although, anytime you're chasing somebody else's acceptance, there are a lot of downsides to that. But I always felt like the rules don't necessarily apply to me. I saw my father spend all kinds of rules of all the time, people telling him he couldn't do things and he would just do it. And, I think the reality in life is that 90% of the limitations on you come from you, right? It's like, even if you're told a rule, you're like, you could probably get around some of this, right? It's amazing what a smile and a wink. It's like, yeah, that's the rule, but like, just be the person that like people want to help and get around that thing. And like, part of it is just like a lack of fear, being able to look somebody in the eye, to smile, ask for the thing, figure out what rules can be broken, which ones can be bent. And the reality is, again, 90% limitations come from up here.
Talk to me about how you have used that in your career, and what challenging circumstances made you have to get around the rules.
I mean, it's just everywhere, right? Like the whole point of a startup to do something disruptive is to change the rules, right? Like to change the way the game is played. Part of it is, I live a good life because of it. I've had some wealth and I don't need to do that again. And I what drove me there also was two things. One was COVID hit and I'm like, oh, all right, I told the team, we're going to do layoffs. Everybody takes a pay cut. And first call I get 30 seconds after the whole company call is my best salesperson. She calls me and she says, Trevor, you said you have to raise money to like save the company. How much do you need to raise? And I said, I don't know. I think $500,000. She says, I don't have that, but I've got 200,000 and I believe in you and I believe in the company. There were tears coming out of my eyes. There were tears coming out of my eyes just talking about it. And I was like, are you sure? And like, when she said yes, and she put the money in because she believed in me, she believed in the company. And so, 6 months later and a year later, and every day afterwards, when I was faced with existential threats, she did one of the nicest things that anybody in this entire world has ever done for me, right? I can't walk away.
Yeah, very strong motivation. I knew all of my investors personally, and I was not going to lose their money. And so when I had these challenges, that always was in the back of my mind, is I'm not going to lose their money. Even more, that responsibility that you're stewarding somebody else's money is, I think, if you have a strong moral compass, it's a very important driver.
Like, I was not a particularly great spouse at that time, just not a great person to be around, as you can imagine. And as I mentioned, there was some other, like, during that time, my mother passed away, which was, expected. She was older. My brother passed away completely unexpectedly, and he's one of the most amazing people in the world. And we had ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages, and like, I'm, trying to be there in support of others when I literally had nothing in the tank. And I think my calculus with a son, I don't want to be miserable to my son. I guess I don't want to be miserable to my wife either, but I was for a little, and she was miserable too, so we were both miserable. But there's a point where, it just doesn't make sense, right? And so, like, maybe some of the wisdom is finding the fact that knowing in my heart that I can overcome this thing and choosing not to. And I think that's really hard.
So how have your motivations changed? What drives you now, or why do you do what you do now? Because you still work very hard. You're still an entrepreneur. What is the drive now, and how has that changed over the years?
I don't know that it has changed, other than I have like a better armament and skill set. And I think there's something like the game for me, and is in startups, is like taking this idea, right? And you're an underdog, and they're probably huge players. I mean, that are 100 times your size, and you're going to beat, right? And you've got a method, and you're going to build something that's lasting. I think there's one, I'm like a Lego kid. Like I always love building things, right? And solving puzzles. And this thing is just like a giant puzzle that you can solve. But then the other piece of it is I just love being amazing men and women. I mean, like you gotta really want to be there in the trenches late at night, you know, customer crisis, things are on fire everywhere. And you're there working late with, 5, 10 other people right next to you. And you're like, I love this, right? Like there's, it's like a little bit of madness there too. But you've got to really love the team building, the joint mission of what you're doing. And for me, technology has always provided like that, like next frontier that can change the game, that gives you a little bit of an unfair advantage to be on that next disruptive force that allows you to take on somebody bigger. And like putting all the pieces together and being the guy that like, one of the things about being a CEO is, and all the problems that can be solved by other people get solved, right? So like the only thing that ends up at the CEO level are all the really nasty, terrible problems. And so that's what your job is, to solve all that. There's this notion of servant leadership that like my job as CEO is to just empower and, unblock all the things for everybody else so they can shine, and like thinking about how to serve them, how to solve the hard problem.
I like what you said about that as a CEO, you're forced to, or your job is to deal with the difficult things because everything else is done by others or can be done by others. I think one thing that I discussed with Mike Ma, who you obviously know too, is one of the things that I always say is that you should focus just on what only you can do. And I think that that's a very important lesson. And I think you talked about what you do. I think actually many founders don't do that, right? They're such control freaks that they don't trust their employees to do anything. So they don't empower them to make any decisions. And really what you said is that let them make all the decisions that they can make, and I'll only make the really, really important ones or really difficult ones that they can't make. And so I think that speaks for your great leadership as a CEO.
Well, look, I think it's a goal. I'm probably not very good at it. So like the general rule of thumb is if somebody can do something 70% as good as you should delegate it and give it to them. So I definitely try and do that, but I also try and set where the bar is, right? Like understand what's the level of work that's being delivered there, and help guide people to say, actually, the bar's here and like, here's how you get there. But then you got to walk out and not be the person producing it, right? Like, I think Mike said something like who we talked about is like, I'm trying to remember what this pressure is a privilege, right? Like it's a real privilege. Like, I mean, you mentioned kind of like the miscarriages, the ectopic pregnancy was 5 years, IVF, like needles. And my wife like literally is scared of needles. Like she used to pass out of needles, and I could administer multiple needles a day. It was terrible. And now he's here, and it's like pure joy, right? Like, I get to work on these interesting problems in AI and natural language processing. I get to advise startups who are going through the struggle and like give them that hint of wisdom that hopefully helps them turn a corner. Like that's like an amazing privilege. So I think I find that I can take a lot of joy, and like the pain just like bounces right off of me. I think I also talked to my wife once, and I forgot exactly, something really bad was, and she's like, how are you even functioning? Because like, this Chris, I was like, I have this ability to kind of like take this terrible tragedy thing and like compress it and put it in a box, and it's here, it's in my chest, and there's a little vacuum, and it may take me a much longer time probably to process my father's passing away when I was 16. Took me, I don't know, 25 years. Probably took me meeting my wife and having love and being able to set up a new family. because my family fell apart after that. It's a long story on there too. But now I really have a lot of control over this box and this valve. And like, there were times where I was like, okay, I'm gonna go process a little of this and let it out, so I can minimize the negative and appreciate the positives, even small.
I think the challenge with boxing up your feelings is that we don't process them, and then we might not feel it at the moment, but at some point, in some way, it manifests itself. Often, it's like our health that suffers from it. So, I naturally am the same way as you are, and so when a terrible situation happened, we also had a very difficult time conceiving, and Sienna did get pregnant, and then we unfortunately lost the baby very late term, and it was a very difficult time for both of us. She was very depressed and cried and couldn't get out of bed and couldn't move really, whereas I was just dealing with the situation. I was on the outside I looked fine, which made her actually mad because it looked like I was not grieving.
Yeah.
And then the situation, she got better, and then suddenly I totally fell apart. And it was actually, a stupid thing. I mean, not stupid, but what's his name from the Beastie Boys died, and I just like cried like a baby. And I was thinking to myself, like, why am I crying about somebody that I don't even know? And of course, it was all that pent up sadness that I've had that I didn't allow myself to deal with, because I've always been conditioned to handle the situation.
Yeah.
And now I'm trying very hard to better feel my feelings when they arise. Somebody said to me, emotions are energy in motion. So when it comes in, and if we recognize it, then we are able to let it go, or to let if we process it. If not, then it gets stuck in us, and then it can have physical, but also of course mental challenges. But
yeah. I mean, look, my wife, I told her this. I was like, I actually, like, it's very visceral. Like I can actually feel it. I feel the box. I feel the valve. And she said, that sounds really unhealthy. It's like, I said two things. It's like, well, how well do you think I deal with these issues? And she's like, you're actually pretty spectacular at it. So it's like, okay, well, that's a good signal. But the key is the valves, right? Like a lot of people can like box it up, but like the key is to let it out, and let it out in controlled waves. And so I feel like that's where, like, eventually you have to process it.
Yes.
I think the key is just the control on when to process it and how to process it. I mean, I live on the 47th floor on the deck. I mean, believe me, there were days that I yelled so loud that like everybody on Fulton Street was like, what the hell is going on here? Like, when a contract didn't come through, and I realized, oh my God, we're going to run out of money in 3 days. And just like, oh my God, like, just yelling at the world. Why wouldn't anything go my way?
Yeah. I'm not sure if our conversation is going to inspire people to be entrepreneurs. It probably is going to scare the shit out of them. Because, I have significant PTSD from it. Those moments when you know that you're going to run out of money in 3 days, and you somehow magically have to make that money appear. Otherwise, you can't make payroll, or you can't whatever.
Also, the hard part about it for me was like just putting on it. Like, you want to be an authentic leader, and you're on these Zooms with the team being like, everything's fine. Like, yeah, we're going to make it through. And like, meanwhile, you're like, I don't know how I'm going to pay you guys tomorrow. You're just like, yeah, that facade that you have to put on, I think is to a certain extent the hardest part, right? Because that's the hardest part of the valve, right? It's like this lack of authenticity with people and in your life. And I think that's a little bit of the hard part, is to make sure you have enough room to tell people, like, actually, I'm not doing very well, and not let the valve just explode, right?
Yeah, the authenticity, I think, is very, very important, because, of course, you have to be the cheerleader of the company, and you have to keep things rolling. But employees, the same way as kids, they see through you if you're not being authentic.
I feel like I've been in the same situation with you and your wife of like, what is your response to helping somebody who's grieving that you're also grieving, right? Um, I'm kind of like you. I'm gonna like stiff upper lip. I'm gonna, put the shoulders up. We're gonna make it through. You know, my wife had the same reaction of like, what's wrong with you? Like, why aren't you feeling this tragedy the same way? And I don't know what the right balance is there, right? Like you want to empathize and show her that her kind of her reactions and her emotions are absolutely completely normal and reasonable and that she's got a partner in that you're not making her feel like she's an alien for feeling this way. But at the same time, I do feel like there's a value to the strength of continuing forward on and trying to push and hold the family together on your shoulders. And that's kind of the default that I've gone to.
That is true. I think a lot of it has to do with empathy, right? So if you need to make sure that you're empathetic to your partner so that they feel seen and heard, which, I have not always succeeded at, or many times have not. But then also at the same time being empathetic to yourself too, allowing yourself to be weak, allowing yourself to have those feelings, because if we're too hard on ourselves, we end up doing things that are not driven based on who we truly are, but on things that are probably not that important.
Yeah. I like, I don't really talk about this, but there were, when my brother passed, I would tell my wife I'm going for a walk, and I would like cry for 30 minutes, with the dog. So, there's ways to do that, I think, on your own, and ways to do that socially, and with a partner. I was always most comfortable doing it alone, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know that's a good thing. My sense is the healthiest relationships aren't that way, but it's what I can do with my vow.
Trevor, I appreciate your time. It was it was fun for me. I hope it was fun for you.
Yeah, it's emotional.
We'll have to do it again one day.
Yeah.
And thank you for being vulnerable, and thank you for sharing some difficult moments, because that's really what all of us are dealing with. And by us sharing it, we're helping others, because normalizes all of our trials and tribulations.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta be honest. I think I can count guys talking about miscarriages in my entire life on one hand, right? And the reality is, something like 30 or 50% of pregnancies end up in miscarriages, and like every guy that has a kid probably has a story, right, of what they went through, and they don't talk about it. Like, I'm really proud of my wife, who's an influencer, for being really open about the journey. I think helping a lot of people. We as men don't really do that very well. So, I appreciate you opening up and having that conversation as well.
Thanks, Trevor.